You are listening to The Exchange by Evolution, a melting pot of ideas and inspiration shared by some of the most successful tech leaders in Asia. I'm Sid, and I help tech companies hire the best talent across product and sales. And today I'm your host. Today we will be talking about building, maintaining, and retaining teams. And joining us today is Abhishek Kasina, the CPO at LiveSpace, Asia's largest omni-channel home interiors and renovation platform. They are one of 4 companies that achieved unicorn status last year, and the company raised around a total of $450 million in capital from notable investors like KKR and Inca Group. And they operate in Singapore, Malaysia, KSA, which is Saudi Arabia, and India. Quick disclaimer before we get into anything. All thoughts and opinions discussed in the podcast are that of the individual and not that of their companies. So I guess with that out of the way, let's get started. It's great to have you here today.
Great to be here, sir.
So just to allow our listeners to get to know you a little bit better, can you just share like a high-level description about your background and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Very quickly, right? I've been working at technology companies for a fair bit now. I did my undergrad in computer science from IIT, which is one of the premier institutes in India for engineering. I worked for a few years as a developer, getting my hands dirty, building products from scratch. Then I transitioned into product management, which seemed to be a very natural evolution given what I was enjoying as I was actually part of the entire engineering teams in some of the companies before. And as a transition to that, I did my master's in London Business School. Most of my product management career, I've been at LiveSpace. I've also had a brief stint in Kareem, which is one of the largest transportation network. It started off as one of the largest transportation networks in the Middle East. Now it's become like the everyday super app of the Middle East, and that was a very interesting experience. And through this entire journey, I've also had the opportunity and privilege to work with a large number of startups as part of accelerators as well. And at LiveSpace in particular, I oversee the entire product platform evolution as we're looking at the entire home industry. As Sid was saying, right, I think we've spent a considerable amount of time on this problem. It's almost been 8 years that we've been working. And as Jeff Bezos says, right, as much as it's a cliche, it's day one. There's a lot to do. And I just have had the privilege to lead a world-class team, build and lead a world-class team at LiveSpace, and super excited to talk about that entire journey and share that with you guys.
Yeah, perfect. So I think, in our previous conversations, I think this is one of the topics that you're probably the most passionate about and something that you're very keen on speaking on. I guess tell us a little bit more about how you got into product leadership specifically.
I'll actually break this down, right? I mean, product leadership is actually composed of 2 parts. Product leadership as a mindset and product leadership as a role, right? I think anybody who wants to be a successful product manager needs to become a product leader in their mindset very, very early on, right? So, and what I mean by that is you are taking ownership and accountability of what you are building, and you're ensuring that whatever you're building is delivering the right value to your customer, right? Like that's where it starts. So I see a lot of product managers just coming into product management because it's cool, and then they kind of struggle their way to reaching there. I think I've been very, very fortunate in that way that very, very early on in my career, I've had the opportunity to work in startups, and that to early stage startups. So if I'm actually tracing back my journey, right, like I said, I worked for a few years as a software developer, but very early on I transitioned into a very early stage startup that was literally being ideated. Yeah, so we were for the first few months working out of cafes. Right, so literally it was like four of us. We used to go in the morning, sit there, order a bunch of coffees because otherwise we'd be kicked out. So every 2 hours we used to order coffee. But from an experience perspective, what I've had the opportunity to do was I was literally the tech person number one, right? So there was a business person, there was a product person, etc. But tech was just me in the beginning, right? And that actually exposed me to two great mindsets in a way, right? First, the fact that I had to own and drive almost everything, right? So if something had to happen, I had to own end to end and kind of do it. And second, it also gave me exposure into various facets of running a technology team, right? Like I was doing the development part, but I was also doing the product management part, and I was doing the analytics part, and I was doing the design part, and I was doing the DevOps part. Like because we didn't have a choice. That quite honestly, that's a very small scale, right? It's not as much as the scale that we are operating, but it still gave me a taste of what it is, and that is when I kind of realized that, hey, maybe, product management is something that I'm enjoying more because that's right at the intersection of a lot of key work streams, right? Business, product management, product design, data. And you also have the sense of ownership when you're actually bringing all of this together. So I had both of these exposures very early on. And that is what helped me make a very conscious decision that, hey, I want to really give product management an honest shot and then see where it goes. And that's where it all started. And one of the things that I realized at that point in time was, I was good at problem solving, which was fine. And, problem solving, leveraging technology, I think that's a very important thing. But one thing that I felt was missing, and as a product manager, I think this is a very important characteristic, that you need to be self-aware. Right? So I kind of realized that it's great that I can problem solve, but my problem solving was still chaotic, right? So it kind of needed a very, can I add more structure into my problem solving? Can I understand business problems in a structured way and then put together solutions cohesively, where I'm not just solving this problem because I see it or somebody told me, but I step back, look at the entire business and break it down, right? And that is what prompted me to kind of pursue my master's in management. And then I went and did it in London Business School. And then I came back. And at that point, I was very sure. And I remember back in university, right? I think we have different terms where different companies kind of come in. So the first term is like consulting, second term is like banking, and like third term is retail and product management. And I was like very sure. I was like, I'm only going to do product management. So I was not giving consulting interviews, I was not giving banking interviews. And people were like, panicking, like, why are you not, like, you should go and you should. But I was like very clear that this is what I want to do, and then I'll figure out my path. And that was when I kind of stumbled upon LiveSpace. And funnily enough, at LiveSpace, I was product manager number one. Right? Again, I think there was a very weird continuity from my pre-masters era to post-masters era. That's how it started. Now, the transition from a product manager to a product leader, post that, when the mindset has shifted, but actually in terms of roles, I think what contributes to that would be a combination of, I think, three factors, right? The first factor is results and impact, right? There is nothing that will replace that. You need to be consistent in delivering outsized value to your users and to the business. Now, it's your ability to kind of figure out what are those initiatives that I'm going to pick up to be able to deliver that. Right? And so I think that's one. The second thing is a little bit of foresight and planning. right? Like you need to be very clear that this is where I want to reach, and you need to have honest conversations with everyone that, hey, I'm looking to reach here, and how do we kind of map the whole thing. And uh, very very closely related part to that is you need to be okay to take risks, right? So I'll probably dig deeper a little bit on that. And I think third thing, which a lot of people massively underestimate or overestimate, right? Since there's no middle ground, unfortunately, when people look at this, is luck and serendipity, right? It does play a part. Yeah? So you need to be okay that there's a lot of good people that have been on very very good paths, but things didn't work out at the last moment or something. It's not a testament to them not doing well. Sometimes luck makes plays a very important part. So I think that's what's important. And particularly in my journey, I think there have been different phases where some things worked out much more importantly. For example, I think when I was in live space earlier, the very fact that I was product manager number one gave me a lot of insight into how the whole platform was architected, right? And it's a very complex problem. So even today, when somebody comes and tells me, hey, this is how I've written a PRD, this is how I'm problem solving it, I would be able to say, hey, you know what, you're doing the right thing, or very quickly identify what's going wrong and very quickly course correct, right? So that's on understanding the whole thing. But when I actually transitioned for a couple of years to Kareem, and then I came back, the Kareem experience was also very very useful, because from product suite that was focused on designers and customers, and it's a low frequency transaction in a way that LiveSpace does, I got exposed to a high frequency transaction where we were doing probably back in those days, right? We were doing a million transactions a day, right? So that was a stark contrast, and it was a risk. Like I kind of said, I'll consciously take a pause, I'll get myself exposed to something else which gives me a new skill set and which will give me a new edge, and then I'm going to come back, right? And once I kind of came back to LiveSpace, I was able to bring all of that together in the LiveSpace context, and then a call back to the first point, right? How do you consistently keep delivering results and impact? So the more you kind of demonstrate that, the path to leadership becomes more and more clearer for you. Now, a final aspect to it is, if you want to be a leader in the true sense, you need to be able to manage people and teams. And that is something that you need to learn over time, right? So a lot of times people want to become product leaders very, very quickly because they see that, it's very glamorous. Honestly, it's not, right? So there are a lot more nuances other than just problem solving, writing PRDs that you as a product leader need to solve. And you need to be exposed to the right set of things to kind of grow, right? So my final thing on product leadership would be, don't rush through it, right? It's okay to take time to kind of get there.
So I would say, the topic that we're going to be speaking on about building, maintaining, and retaining teams, it's maybe particularly poignant now, given we're seeing companies doing mass layoffs, a lot of uncertainty in this industry, the tech industry. I guess you've been through multiple phases within the live space journey, right? You've done the building, you've done the maintaining, you have to do the retaining constantly. Yeah. So I guess take us through that. When you were first building the teams, what were you looking out for in the people that you brought on board? And I guess, how do you decide, who to add into the teams and how to structure the teams?
I think that's a very good question, and would actually add a little bit more context to this question. So while you added that, hey, this is a current macroeconomic scenario and something else is happening, what I believe is, when you're building teams, it's very, very important for the product leader to figure out the purpose of building that team, given the context and maturity of the organization. right? So you don't want to be building massive teams with a lot of functions when you're like very, very early, right? And to be honest, for the first few years, we were just like 2 product managers, right? And increasingly, as the platform grew, we started adding more and more. Now, because I've seen the entire evolution of the product and technology teams at LiveSpace, I can actually give you how the thought process evolves in terms of how you're building teams. Right? So very, very early on in the journey, you will be hiring out of necessity, where you see that people have run out of bandwidth. Right? You say that, hey, there is somebody who I've hired as a product manager, and he's doing a really good job. He or she is doing a good job, but they can't do more than this. But the scope of work is large, so I'll bring somebody else. And it becomes a very interesting cat and mouse thing, right? Because you have people, so you create work, so you have work, so you hire people, and that kind of runs. And that's how a lot of early stage companies, growth stage companies kind of grow. And if I actually take a step back, it's not just growth stage companies or early stage companies, but every company, if it's in a growth stage, for example, Facebook or Google or Zoom during COVID, right? They were in a growth phase, right? And they weren't before. They kind of were in a mature stage before. And then, startups very, very early need to be in a hyper growth stage. And that's how things kind of grow. At one point, you kind of realize that this is inefficient, right? And now that inefficiency could come in many different ways, right? The first way could be that there's a lot of duplication, there's a lot of people on the ground, but the impact of that is not proportionate to the effort that's being put. Or it could be that people are kind of getting burnt out because of what they're doing. And the fourth thing would be that you're trying to get people who are so much of generalists, because you expect them to do analytics, you expect them to do design and all of that, and either they're like great generalists and they can't go into depth, because as companies mature, you need to like really go deep, or from a leadership and team building perspective, it kind of becomes very inefficient to find people and hire such people, right, at scale, because there's only so much supply of good generalists. And that is when I think mindset shifts again. So when you're going from like an early stage growth to a more mature organization, you're going to flip the whole equation. It'll basically say, how do I see the organization? What do I want the organization to do? And when I mean organization is a product organization, right, or a technology organization. So given I have an end goal in mind, that this is how I see a technology team work in the context of the broader company, to that end, how do I structure that? Right? And that varies widely across every company, right? Even if they're tackling the same problem, because the strengths of every other team are going to be different. And at least the way I look at my team is that how do we kind of support everybody else, and identify where whatever their weaknesses are and can be augmented. And while doing this, we need to ensure that the value to the user is consistent, right? So broadly, this is how the thought process of building teams evolves. And the way we have structured at LiveSpace was precisely based on this. When we kind of started off, we were a bunch of product managers just picking up problems, right? And over time, we've switched to a more cohesive approach, where we are essentially looking at the overall organization strategy 18-24 months out. And then we say, okay, if this is what we want to do, how do we structure the team? Now, that could result in us saying, hey, we need to go and hire people. Or it could be that, oh, you know what, we don't need to hire people, but we just need to restructure teams. or it could be that everything's hunky dory and you don't need to do much, right? So it could be any of these, but I think it's very, very, very important for leaders to kind of be very clear on the end state. But at the same time, don't be what should I say? Don't be attached to that, right? Because the market realities change. So you should be in line with what the market reality changes and corresponding the company strategy changes, right? If that happens, you accept it and then figure out how to go forward. But I think the flip side to that, because it's not a very scientific thing, right? I think it's an art, the whole leadership bit. You need to see which of those market trends are genuine medium to long term trends versus short term shocks. Because if you react to short term shocks, then your team is going to be so much in flux and they don't have the psychological safety to do what they want. But if you're actually genuinely looking at medium to long term trends and responding to them accordingly, I think, overall, even the team will feel good and they kind of understand what's happening and why that's happening, right? So yeah, that's my take on how to build teams. But if there's anything in particular that you don't want to know, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, so once you've kind of built your team, you have the structure, you're happy with everyone in there, how do you get the best out of them, consistently? Because I think everyone responds to a slightly different leadership style. Everyone has, little nuances in their character that as leaders, it's hard to identify for each person, but you have to try and you have to do your best to get the best out of everyone. Yeah. So how have you done it? And I guess how's the journey in that side?
Again, this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I think the answer to this is a very cliche topic in most of the literature, the companies, but it is cliche because it's so true, right? The answer to this is culture. Now, just like leaders need to be very, very conscious when they're building and structuring teams upfront, and then you're hiring or doing whatever is needed to put that team in place. It's very, very important as leaders for you to define the team's culture, right? And you can choose to have a team culture that is slightly different from the company culture, and that's okay, right? A lot of times I've seen people saying that, hey, this is overall our culture, so we don't want to change it. It's okay, because as long as you're working with the goal that you want to generate maximum value for your users and the organization, you need to kind of define what works well for the team. And this is something I believe at LiveSpace, I've had the privilege to see very, very closely from our founders, and I've learned from the best in a way, right? Both at Kareem and LiveSpace. And I think both these places put so much effort into defining and enforcing the culture that it's there in the fabric of every leader. And how I see culture kind of, okay, let me actually simplify, because culture means a lot of things to a lot of people. In a nutshell, what culture means is, what do you celebrate and what do you kind of identify as something that's not accepted or something that needs to be changed if somebody demonstrates, right? In a nutshell, that's what culture is. Culture is not that, hey, we go out on parties every Saturday or something, right? That's great, that's an outcome, but that's not the essence of what culture is, right? And it's very, very important that culture is not just communicated, but culture is actually reinforced, right? Now, communication helps, right? The best leaders that I've seen, communicate the culture as often as they can. But when somebody in your team is looking at what is the impact of the culture in my life and why should I really care, is when you're using culture as a framework, when you're having conversations with them in terms of what's been good, bad, and ugly, right? Um, so, and on the other hand, you need to be, or what I see has worked out very, very well is you need to be ruthless on culture, right? There've been instances where somebody was like very, very smart, but we had to let them go because they were under cultural fit, and it's not a loss, right? Because if we kind of allow somebody who's not a cultural fit to be part of the team, teams will start questioning whether culture really makes sense, right? So I think it's about defining the right culture in terms of what you want to enforce, what you want to see in a way, right? And very, very religiously ensuring that that's there, right? And as it is very, very easy when you have a small team because you are able to see what's happening and then you can course correct. But as the teams kind of grow larger, it becomes non-trivial. But I think that's one of the biggest jobs of product leaders. So in most of my conversations with my teams, I say that, guys, you have very clearly defined product areas. Somebody's doing customer experience, somebody's doing growth or whatever. But do you know what my product area is, right? And then people kind of say, oh, the whole platform is your product area. I said, no, the product team is my product area, right? I need to make sure that you guys are happy, you guys are growing, learning, and making sure that you guys are delivering impact that is actually setting yourself up for success, right? One of the very popular phrases in live space leadership, and that's kind of come from Anuj, who's our co-founder and CEO. He says leaders need to fire themselves, right? And what that actually means is that you are investing in your teams to learn, grow, and take over your whatever you're doing as of right now, so that they see a very clear path to grow. And we as leaders, we are freeing up our time to kind of go after bigger problems, right? And in our teams in particular, we actually celebrate somebody growing, right? If you see that, hey, somebody is doing really good job, we love to give them more responsibility and increasingly say that, you know what, you do more of my job, and you see a very clear line of path to become me, and then I kind of identify other opportunities, and it's my responsibility to ensure that A, you are growing, and B, I am identifying what are the future areas that we as an organization need to focus on, not just the team, so that this particular mindset allows both, right? The company is growing, we know what to do, and then everybody in the team is growing as well.
Okay. So culture would be the primary thing that drives the high standard. So I guess when you're hiring, right, how do you assess for this?
That's a very good question. In terms of cultural fit, it's actually very, very hard to assess, right? Now, the only way we can get a sense of the cultural fit is just through experience, right? The more interviews you kind of take, and then you make mistakes, and that is what kind of gives you an insight that, hey, these are the red flags that I need to look out for. So there's not, again, a set template for cultural fit. It's sheer number of interviews and sheer number of mistakes you make in hiring, okay? So I would rather trust somebody who's made like a lot of, not like a decent number of bad hires, but less proportion of bad hires to actually assess fit than people who have not hired bad, right? Because I don't know what to attribute that to. Is like, do you have like a secret sauce to kind of access it so very well, or have you just been insanely lucky when you actually hired people, right? So that's what I think culture kind of comes down to. One is making mistakes in hiring. Second is the patterns that you kind of identify within your team. Because even in your team, not everybody would be 100% cultural fit, right? Not necessarily that they're misfits, but you kind of see that, hey, this is where somebody is not doing a good job, etc. And then when you're having a conversation with people who are potentially interviewing with you, you kind of look out for those patterns. So when I do any cultural fit assessment discussions, I don't give them any case studies or anything, right? Because people have already assessed him for that. But what I kind of see is I start probing into their past experiences and see how they've kind of responded to specific instances that they themselves bring up. And sometimes I just modify the situation and say, hey, imagine if you were doing the same thing, but this parameter has changed. How do you kind of do that? Now, in those specific instances, people can't fake, right? Because there is no set scenario for them to kind of see. And we kind of take whatever is a candidate's experience and then modify it, and that becomes very, very unique to that particular interviewee, right? So people don't come prepared, and more often than not, they are honest selves. And also during those discussions, very, very early, I kind of try to make them comfortable, saying that, and honestly, it's an honest conversation, because as much as we want to hire a person who's cleared all of the technical rounds, and they want to join us because they have gone through all of those rounds and they're speaking to us. One thing that I believe is a candidate and a company, or somebody in my team and my company, we need to make sure that we are adding value to each other, right? If we as an organization cannot add value to you as a person, then it's actually a wrong choice, right? Sometimes candidates might not realize that, and that is why, because early on in my career, when I used to go through all of these HR interviews, I was like, why are they asking me all these questions, right? But the more I've kind of gone through, it becomes very important, because at some point you will be disillusioned with what you are actually doing versus what your goals and dreams were, right? And that's how we look at hiring, right? It's not just that you have the technical chops to kind of add value to us, but we critically assess if we are able to add value to you in the medium to long term, right? Short term, it's great. You're part of a company that's a unicorn and you get a brand in your CV, which is great. But are you in it for the long term? And that is how we look at this.
Yeah. So as a recruiter, we know how hard it is for companies to retain talent. Like, part of our jobs is to help these displaced candidates find new jobs. And there's always a multitude of reasons why candidates leave their roles, whether it's disagreement with their direct manager, or they are just looking for their career growth, whether it's monetary or title, however they view it, right? How have you managed this? Because I think in our previous conversation, you did mention that attrition is quite low, and that people in your company generally stay and progress within the company. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So I think it's a little bit of a callback to culture that I was talking about. And like I said, I think LiveSpace, we've been very, very fortunate to be obsessed, for the lack of a better word, about having the right culture and having the right guardians for culture. But beyond that, I think two reasons why we've been able to retain teams very, very well, like I said, is one, we are a very, very transparent organization where we discuss what's happening on a very very frequent basis. Like I sit with all of my leaders across the tech team every week, and then we discuss a lot of things very openly. We have a monthly feedback surveys that go out, and then we get the feedback on the ground, what's happening, and then we are acting on that very very quickly. So everybody in the organization knows that they have a voice, right? And then they can reach out to, like, I have open office hours that anybody in the team can just book and then have a conversation with me, etc. Right? So it's very very important for every single person to feel that they have a voice and they are being heard, and they're being heard in an empathetic way and not in a judgmental way, right? But that is deeply ingrained in the company, and transparency goes both ways. Like whatever is happening in the organization, we make sure that everybody kind of gets exposed to that. Now there could be a slight delay because we want to ensure that things are structured right. When you have like a lot of context, you can absorb a lot of chaos, but especially if you're a product manager handling like one part, how do you kind of manage it? So sometimes take time to kind of structure it, but we make sure that there is complete transparency from the leadership to every single person, and we push for the same thing. And one mantra that we use in the technology team, and this is something that we established very early on, was that as a team, we're going to be better today than we were yesterday, and we'll be better tomorrow than we were today, right? Now, however incremental that is, and that could come from like very small things, right? You basically gotten rid of a ritual that you are doing that was taking too much time. It could be that you have what should I say? Yeah, it could be that you have identified key people who can take on more responsibility so that they can deliver outsized impact. It could be anything, right? But that is one thing that whenever I am sleeping, even tonight when I'm going to go sleep, I just think, hey, was the team better today than it was yesterday, right? And that's okay. So in the long term, this will make us become like the best technology team in the world, right? Because every time it adds up. Now, while all of these principles are good on paper, right, I think it actually comes down to whether the teams see you take responsibility and accountability when things don't go right? Because not everything is going to work perfectly, right? For example, I think one of the things that we've had was we had somebody join the team and it wasn't working out. Yeah, like I said, if there was a cultural mismatch, it literally feels like, the cog is not fitting in the entire machinery and it's generating a lot of money. And when that happened, like, and the fact that I realized it as soon as I could, and when I realized it, we moved very, very quickly to address that. And in a very, very open forum, I just said, guys, sorry, I screwed up. Now, I'm going to take responsibility to make sure that things get back on track. And we kind of did that. But when leaders demonstrate that level of accountability and ownership, teams see that, right? And if they are the right cultural fit for the entire organization, they tend to stick, because there are few things that happen, right? They know that things are in a way very predictable. They know what to expect from you as a leader. They know what to expect from the company, right? So when you are offering that kind of predictability, that kind of translates to psychological safety, right? That doesn't mean that the company direction won't change or the product area doesn't need to evolve rapidly, etc. But it helps them focus on that and not anything else, right? So they're not worried about, hey, what's going to happen tomorrow in my appraisal, because they kind of know very, very clearly. For example, we have like monthly feedbacks, and the whole point about that was your quarterly rating or appraisal should not be a surprise. You should just be like, yeah, I kind of know what I'm going to get, right? So that is how we've looked at the retention problem. Have a very strong culture, reinforce it, and ensure that culture is a two-way thing. Like, you are holding yourself accountable and you're holding everybody else accountable. And literally, in a lot of meetings, people call back to our cultural principles, saying that, hey, you are not exhibiting this, and that's totally fine. And everything else, I'm not saying is not important. It's like, you need to make sure that the teams have fun. You need to make sure that teams are compensated well, and you have the right mix. And also realize that every person is unique, right? In terms of what their short, medium to long term needs are, right? And can you be flexible enough to cater to those needs? If you are, that's great. And to be very honest, it's easier in smaller teams, and as the teams grow, it becomes increasingly harder. You fall back on frameworks. But I think that's how we've kind of looked at retaining, by actually flipping the whole equation and saying, this is not a problem for a company looking at people saying, hey, how do I kind of keep them captive? But how do we as an organization make it a place that people want to stay? Correct? And I myself am a very prime example of this. So when I initially worked at LiveSpace, one of the big reasons that I kind of came back is how much I love the culture at LiveSpace and the people that I worked with, right? And I want to ensure that every single person in my team walks away with that feeling. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think that's all the time we have today, unfortunately, and it was really good speaking to you. And thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on this topic. Um, I think our listeners probably would have gained a lot from this, and I think they probably have a much better understanding about how things go on at LiveSpace. So really appreciate you joining us for this.
Thanks, Ed. It was a lovely conversation, and thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So, folks, that's all. Please stay tuned for more podcasts, and we'll see you next time.